Hello my beautiful co-creators, Lilu here. Today we're in Vancouver, actually in British Columbia in Canada, with Alfred, that is actually the author of Exopolitics. So very, very exciting. And Alfred is also a futurist, so we're going to talk about ETs, ITs, what's really going on in this universe. And you're a pioneer, really. You've been researching these topics since 1973?
Yes, I'm of the class of 1973.
Uh-huh.
That's when I had my experience.
Uh-huh. And that's when you moved also to this area, because you're saying this area is really special and marked quite a pivotal point in your own research. And
yeah, I think that this area is special. I've lived all over the planet, and I was living in New York City at the time in 1973, and actually Peter Zowski, who's one of the great hosts of the Canadian Broadcasting Company, asked me to come up to Vancouver. I think it was when my first book came out. Yeah, that's Papillon. Asked me to come up to Vancouver to be on his CBC national television show when my first book came out in 1974. So I flew up from New York City and spoke to all of Canada about this coming era, and it just felt like this was kind of my, charm city, and a beautiful city it was. And my wife and I were married in January 1st of 1998. So we came here on our honeymoon, and we decided to move here on permanent honeymoon. So we're here. Yeah.
And you've been really exposing a lot of information that a lot of people have not really dared to expose, haven't you?
To me, it's very natural.
Yeah.
and it's like, it's what I've lived with over the last 40 years. Mm-hmm. But I guess suddenly now's the time for it all to come out. So it's like I've been exposing it all along, but it's just people are starting to take notice of what I've been doing now.
Mm-hmm. So what is exopolitics? How do you define that?
Yeah.
Let's start from there.
Yeah, sure. Exopolitics is the science of relations between or among intelligent civilizations in the multiverse. And it appears that we live in a multiverse. Our universe is composed of, billions of galaxies. I mean, we don't know what the number is. We know that in our galaxy alone, there probably, the latest number was 500 million planets like ours, and that's probably a gross conservative estimate. No. And we don't know how many universes there are in the multiverse, because they're parallel universes. And so there are many parallel universes, and then we have the dimensions of, quote, the afterlife and the spiritual dimensions, and all of those are part of the multiverse also. In fact, my next book that's coming out later on this year is called Dimensions, the dimensional ecology of the multiverse. So exopolitics talks about how intelligent civilizations relate to each other. And this book came out in the year 2000. And I like to think about it, that old thing about when monkeys, there was a bunch of islands with monkeys on them, and then in one of the islands, monkeys on one island started washing their potatoes, and then sweet potatoes or yams and all the other ones. The humanity was sort of lacking a meme or some systematic way that our society could interface with other intelligent civilizations. And with exopolitics, this gives a whole schematic. by which we as a civilization can interact with other civilizations, be they be on other planets or in other dimensions adjacent to ours. So with the launching of my book, it really launched a whole new field. But not only a new field, a new opening to reality. And since the publication of the book in the year 2000, there's been an acceleration of the opening of Earth and Earthlings to the universe. Now over 30 to 40 nations have opened their secret extraterrestrial UFO files. In Europe, in South America, in Asia, New Zealand, Australia.
So we're talking part of the government here.
Yeah.
Military files.
Yes.
Things that were classified before have been now open and are shared on an international level.
Yeah, and that process has become tremendously accelerated since Exopolitics came out, and this meme has sort of been shared. And there are about 30 or 40 Exopolitics organizations throughout the world, and it's been it was named for Wood of the Year, and people understand it. You know, it's just kind of understood. So it's like it opened up a whole part of the collective mind, I think, to be able to think about, oh, well, of course, there are other civilizations, you know, and we had been under such an information embargo here, because the fact is that, as I've discovered in the basis of research, the U.S. government has had secret human extraterrestrial liaison programs for the last 50, 60 years. And they've wanted to keep a monopoly on those programs in order to benefit from the technology transfers and the financial benefits that some of the large capital interests get from the corporations, but not really to open up those technologies for the benefit of humanity, even though our environment is, you know, on the verge of collapse. So I found it. What I call exopolitics now is a survival science. It provides a way that we can speak to each other about the role that off-planet cultures that are visiting us now can positively help us, you know, without having the usual, oh, that's crazy. Oh, you know, that's this, that's that. What happened, Lilu, is that in 1952, in July of 1952, there was a big flap of interdimensional extraterrestrial UFOs, which flew over the U.S. Capitol. And that, they were probably gray ETs. And they probably came in, they were what we call hyperdimensional. And they have the ability, in fact, we can analyze it through photography now, and they have the ability with their ships to create their own wormholes to come in from the adjacent dimensions into our third dimension here. And they flew behind the US Capitol, and those photographs are archetypal photographs. I'm sure that you've seen them. They were on the front pages of the newspapers throughout the world. So the military mentality said, we're afraid of the people panicking. Well, if you look at the public opinion polls, the people aren't panicking. It's the governments who are afraid that their power might evaporate, that are panicking. So they project that onto the people. So as a result of that, in 1953, the CIA convened a panel called the Robertson Panel. And they said that any mention in media or in academia or in science or in education of extraterrestrials or UFOs had to be accompanied by ridicule. And so that from 1953 forward, any time that there's extraterrestrials or anything, anybody tried to mention it, they would lose their career if they were a teacher or a scientist or a journalist or a government official, because that was an order that came down. But meantime, on the inside, corporate interests were developing relationships with extraterrestrial civilization in exchange for technologies that have powered the war industry and made certain countries superpowers and made this kind of a Death Star planet. So this is like, it's almost like a science fiction story, you know? And so this is what we're now, we almost have two jobs. One job is a scientific job, and that's to develop the science of exopolitics and explain how the universe is structured, how the multiverse is structured, and develop models like the dimensional ecology of the multiverse, how it is that souls are created in the spiritual dimensions of the afterlife, and we have replicable results from experiments from hypnotic regressions of 7,000 cases of soul memories of what the human afterlife is, and how people go through, how human souls go through various stages and how they're formed, and then how human souls then come into what we call the exopolitical dimensions. We're in one of the exopolitical dimensions now. We're in the third dimension, the dimension of time-space. It's a very entry-level kind of dimension, but it's an interesting one because you get a lot of bang for the buck here. I mean, you really develop your soul by coming into this one. Yeah, exactly. And there's these tremendous dramas that occur. And so part of our job is to develop these models which are science-based and say, oh, look at this model. It describes the model of the dimensional ecology. Sure, the religions talked about this for thousands of years, but that was based on belief, and that was based on sacred texts, and a lot of that, they had it wrong. The Catholics, wrote out reincarnation around the year 300 AD because it wasn't, they wanted the faithful to obey them more, so they got rid of reincarnation. Well, there's strong scientific evidence for reincarnation, and so now we have a scientific model. But the other part of our job is in the area of what I call praxis, and that is as exopolitical activists. Spiritual warriors is a different term for it. And that's where you kind of walk a fine line, because it does appear that there is a quote, and this is a paradox, a spiritual battle is kind of a paradox in a certain way. Forces of life and death in the multiverse is kind of a paradox. Because but in a free will universe, you would tend to find that. Well, so I'm not only a scientist, but I'm also an attorney, a public interest lawyer. So I have that kind of, background and drive. I was a counsel in the Panther 21 trial in New York in the 60s when the FBI tried to frame the Black Panthers in a bogus plot that they were going to blow up the Statue of Liberty. I was introduced to state oppression. I survived the revolution in Cuba and was jailed by both sides, by both the communists and the capitalists. So, at a very young age. So I, had those kind of lessons early on. And
this is quite extraordinary with your background, having graduated from Yale and then being a lawyer to now, being in exopolitics. It's quite...
Yeah, although I would say that it's just, we were taught always to be at the bleeding edge. And I guess this is the bleeding edge, which is a little more than the leading edge, because you always kind of get bumped, I mean, so part of our job, I think, is to get involved, not to get enmeshed in the duality, and it's really hard if you're coming from unity consciousness and really tuned into the waves of unity consciousness that are emanating from the interdimensional portals of our universe, and really have that as, that's really what's driving us, and coming into the chaos that's causing.
Yeah.
But then seeing that there's tremendous radioactivity that's now being distributed throughout the planet, that these earthquakes are being caused by weapons of mass destruction like HARP and like chemtrails, and that those are all caused by a political and an economic structure that needs to be changed and transformed, and that happens through, it doesn't happen like that. You really have to have social movements and involvement. So that's the kind of fine line, I think, that we have to walk as people who are not only theoreticians, but who are actually practically involved on a day-to-day basis.
But tell us how because you talk about ITs, ETs.
Yeah.
Tell us how what is really their role, and how is that? First of all, I had another question when you talked about our evolution. How do we go? Are ITs and ETs previous beings? Are they coming from a similar background and kind of have graduated to something else, or where are they coming from?
Yeah.
What is their soul evolution, if there is such a thing?
Yeah. This is what I've been able to discover on the basis of science so far, and that I've either published or I'm about to publish, and that is, I was approached by Oxford University Press, a division of Oxford University in the UK, to write a book on extraterrestrial civilizations and the law. And when I first took on that task and looked at that challenge, I said, there's no typology. We're in such a we're in a planet that has been so quarantined that the state of knowledge, of public knowledge, about the nature of intelligent life in the multiverse is so primitive that we don't even have a functional typology of intelligent life in the multiverse. What is the different types of intelligent life? What are the different types of extraterrestrial, interdimensional beings, intraterrestrials? What is that typology? It's all kind of confused and it's not there. So I had to start from scratch. There are a couple of typologies. One was developed by a Russian called Kardashev, that Dr. Michio Kaku has popularized, that says that there's different types of civilizations, a 0 type, 1 type, 2 type, 3 type, all based on your energy type. Whether you've harnessed the energy of your planet, your solar system, your galaxy, and the universe that you live in. And under that, we're a 0 type. We haven't even gotten to level 1. most civilizations auto-destruct before they get to level 1, and we're kind of in that position. Are we going to blow ourselves up before we get there? And I've got an answer to that, which we'll come to later on in the conversation. So let me let me get to that.
Hold on to that.
Yeah. And so what I found in my research, was that there was no typology. And so the typology that I came to is developed on how the different intelligent civilizations in the multiverse describe themselves, which is by the dimension in which they reside. They'll say, oh, I'm a 5th dimension Pleiadian, or I'm a 6th dimension Arcturian. And what dimensions are is they're like discrete, bounded levels of energy, bounded areas of energy that are characterized by different governing factors. Like our governing factor here is time and space. That's what we're here, we're governed by time and by space. And we're in the 3rd dimension. Mr. Papillon is in the 2nd. And I just love to watch how it is that a 2nd dimensional being will interact with the 3rd. You can just learn so much from animals. And I try to extrapolate how it is that upper dimensional beings can interact with us. Now, upper dimensional beings, let's say the generic term that I use is hyper-dimensional beings, you'll get to dimensions like the 4th or the 5th or the 6th dimension, where instead of time, the ruling dimension there will be light, or it will be love. Now, can you imagine, could we imagine a dimension where love is the dimensional kind of definer, I mean, that's what we aspire to here. And what the remote viewers tell us who have gone into other dimensions is that love is like the glue that keeps the entire cosmos together. In other words, it's actually a dimension. It's part of a living energy that we call source. And these are scientific facts. What we have discovered from our afterlife research is that what we could call God is actually a vast sea of light. And we, as individual souls, are little holographic eggs from this sea. So it's like inside yourself, your soul is an actual holographic fragment of God, and inside mine. So that's what they say, namaste. I salute the soul in you. But it's the holograph, it is God, it's the holographic fragment. So we have all of these gods walking around. And in our culture here, which is, has been trained to either compartmentalize that or to try to kill it off, you can see all of those challenges. So that's part of what we try to do in exopolitics, is to bring the scientific approach to all of these and to construct models then that portray all of this accurately, because it's been the inaccuracies and the compartmentalizations in all of the religions over time, I think, that have confused and that have introduced the confusion into this planet. There's just a tremendous amount of confusion, but there's a basic planet, a planet basically of goodwill. It just people, Islam versus Christianity, they're at each other's throats culturally, but that's just because of confusion, because of confused concepts in sacred texts and in traditions that do not conform to the scientific reality of what's there. So our challenge then is, how do we begin to educate? How do we begin to educate and to transform the war culture, and to get and we know that war is an industrial activity. There are bloodlines on this planet that go back many centuries. We've identified them. They worship God. gold, oil, and drugs, and that's what they control. And they go up, I'll name them. One of the controlling bloodlines goes up to the British throne and the nobilities and the City of London banking, and to some of the banking families here in North America, and that goes back to the 1700s and to the opium wars in China, where they subjugated that country through drugs. And now we have the repetition of all of those bloodlines who are bringing in an ecocidal and genocidal policy because they control all the governments. All of the national leaders are kind of their farm team, and they have these enormous weapons like HARP. So part of our job is to expose that and to help bring democracy back into play. Just earlier today, I went to a political rally here for Justin Trudeau, who's the son of former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau here in Canada. Pierre Trudeau was my company's lawyer, actually, earlier when I lived here in Canada. And he's kind of a rising young star. So this is all and yesterday I wrote this article. My Examiner articles are the most, in good months, they're the most widely read political articles in the US in the Examiner. More, they're read by 400,000 people a month. And I wrote one exposing the current president of the United States, as having, all of these ties with the intelligence agencies going back 3 generations to his grandfather and his grandmother, his mother, his father, his stepfather, and to 27 Social Security numbers that he has. So in a single day, I'm dealing with the dimensional ecology, staying up in the vibration of source, and yet, as they say, law is like taking a glass, is like rowing through a sewer in a glass-bottom boat, which is the...
Yeah, those are very different vibrations.
Yeah, and still trying to maintain center, because I think that I feel a social obligation to do that because nobody else is doing it. I call it 360 degree, being able to see the 360 degrees of what's necessary to engage in transformation. And anyway, that's some of what fuels my work and how I can go from exopolitics down to politics in a single day.
So how do you go from going back to the ETs and ITs and us where we are in the dimensions? How do you go from one to the next? How did they graduate? Did they ever graduate? I mean, were they before? Because we heard that some ITs were here millions of years ago. Yeah. And now they've understood some things and are able to help us. Yeah. So it's quite confusing. Can you clarify that? From the model that I can see, okay, the model that I've been able to see is that the exopolitics model is that we live in it's almost the obverse of the 20th century model of science. The 20th century model of science is that all intelligent life ends at the geostationary orbit. In other words, the Earth is the sole. There's only intelligent life on Earth, and the exopolitics model is the obverse of that, and it is that we live in a highly populated multiverse that's filled with intelligent civilizations,
that it's highly organized with their own forms of governance, etc. If you think about, for example, if you're going to build a building here in Vancouver or in a city, you have to go down to the city hall and get all kinds of sophisticated permits. It's the same way throughout the multiverse. The process of building and creating universes, solar systems, and planets is highly decentralized. In other words, life-bearing planets are identified by upper dimensional civilizations as planets that should be settled, and over time great experiments are engendered on those planets. Our race, Homo sapiens, is a result of probably at least a 500,000 year experiment, because it's not just a carbon unit. You know, the traditional evolutionary model is that you know, there were all these different versions that came from certain of the early apes and came up to the Cro-Magnon, and you know, all of these things, and in actuality, humanity evolved as a conscious experiment by upper dimensional civilizations. We developed as a starseed experiment. In other words, we developed as a vehicle into which souls could incarnate. The whole purpose of the physical universe is so that in the what we call the spiritual dimensions, which are a dimension like this, but they're just more refined, is that so the intelligent civilizations of souls can then come and incarnate in here and have sophisticated, very advanced incarnations and experiences of moral development, because our souls are becoming in the long term gods and will be creating universes. This is what appears to be a scientific fact. So it's not just that evolution is working, it's evolution but intelligent intervention. And it's not just intelligent intervention of advanced animals, which are ourselves. We're highly designed, but for a purpose. And the purpose is to serve as vessels for incarnation. We're like a virtual experience theme park for souls. And that's what the religions have traditionally taught. And, you know, it's gotten kind of muddled, but I think by bringing science back, we can really see how remarkable our experience is. Now, in the midst of this, there are all kinds of cross currents going on, because this planet has suffered rebellions, invasions, because there's free will. So that other species of extraterrestrials have invaded this planet and have attempted to subvert the intent of this original plan, and have attempted to make the human race into their slave race by dumbing down the genetic and DNA composition and disconnecting 10 of the 12 strands of DNA. But if you go to our pineal glands, for example, you know, right here in the middle of our heads, that's really a complex circuit connector for the 12-strand DNA. And what's happening now in this transitional era, as the waves of consciousness, of unity consciousness come in, is that we have a number of things happening simultaneously. The crystal children that are coming in, and the young indigos that are coming in, are already coming in with the infrastructure active, say six strands. So they're already functioning to be able to function in the world of the future. People like myself, who I think of as an early indigo, you know, and many of us who are in the consciousness movement and who are conscious, you know, I don't know what the percentage of the world population is. Let's say if it's 95, that's great, you know. Whatever that percentage is, we are either consciously or unconsciously developing that third strand. And, you know, the other strands are there to be activated. And that's what the quote consciousness revolution is. It's really something that's happening through,
on the physical level too.
Yeah, through the internal DNA activation. And all of this is happening as it's a process of breakdown, breakthrough. And the time frame that I see, I look at, is from 2011 to 2025 is a good kind of time frame.
For what? What's in 2025?
Okay, I think that in 2025 we're going to have, and the reason why I say this, for example, in 2025 we will have the landing on the planet of an objective condition of paradise on Earth. And if you take in 2011 now, in the ninth wave, in terms, using terms that Dr. Carl Kalaman uses, who we both know, is that those waves of unity consciousness, in his terms, which I believe scientifically he's correct, carry with them the blueprint of paradise on Earth. That's the condition that is being broadcast, okay? So the question is, at what time will the condition of paradise on Earth manifest? And I believe that the objective condition will manifest in 2025. Why do I say that? Because we have had the case that I've been following over the last, since October of 2010, through my colleague, the late Stanley Fulham, who's a former Canadian NORAD officer, who was in contact for 10 years with an apparent galactic governance council composed of the Pleiadians, the Alpha Centaurians, the Sirians, and even the Bootes Greys. And what they said is that they had they're sort of in charge of this quadrant of the galaxy. And when you read my book, Exopolitics, you'll see the scientific evidence of why we should even consider that there exist bodies like galactic councils, okay? You know, and then so that they had an emergency meeting in January 2010, Earth time, and they saw that the Earth's environment ecology was on the verge of collapse. And they decided to put aside the law of non-intervention. And for reasons, because we're very special in the cosmos. Earthly humans are very special because of our genetic makeup, because of our emotions, because of that starseed project where we now only use 3% of our DNA. and if fully activated, we are actually almost like universe libraries. We are like, have the potential of being like, you know, an extraordinary expression of divinity manifested in the physical world, in design, you know, in our potential. So the Galactic Council decided at this meeting to set aside the law of non-intervention and to intervene around 2015 to clean the atmosphere of the Earth, to restore the ecology. And that will be around 2015. Then I was last December in Mallorca, Spain, and there's a movement there called the Movement of Divine Light, of the New Light, el Movimiento de la Nueva Luz. And that is, by they mean the new light, it also means unity consciousness. In other words, a lot of people are coming to the same mountain through different phrases. And what they were given was that in the year 2023 is where Christ consciousness, or the ability to absorb unity consciousness, will really land on the planet for everyone. And in 2025 then, that is going to be the objective condition of paradise on Earth. In other words, what we're doing here in 2011 and through October 28, 2011, yes, those waves are coming through. And then the question is, can the human instrument absorb all of that? And can the human structure, all of our institutions, how long will it take to absorb it? Well, what the Galactic Council says is that between 2011 and 2015, when they intervene, there'll be 250, if what they say is correct, 250 to 300 Pleiadian ships cleaning up the atmosphere of the radiation, the chemtrails, all of that. Between now and then, there'll be a tremendous transformation. There'll be a collapse of the economic system, a transformation of, you know, there'll be a totally different way of living. And so that transformation will be happening over the next 4 to 5 years. And then after that, after the great cleansing, then comes the landing of paradise on Earth. Then, after I put that together, you know, by meeting all these different people and reading sources, and I start coming upon people that says, yeah, there's prophecies about that. You know, they say first is a great cleansing and then this and that. So that now we're starting to see what the general time frame might be, that we can relate to actual facts. Because the Galactic Governance Council said, and this is in the 300-page book by Stanley Fulham. He died in December. When he first published it, I couldn't believe it. He said, the Governance Council said, we're going to show our Pleiadian ships over New York on October 13th, 2010. Everybody, what? Are you crazy? He sent me his book, and I said, oh my God, why did he do that? Because, you know, every time they say there's going to be showings. Well, October 13th, 2010 came, and there's clear extraterrestrial UFOs or interdimensional UFOs over New York City. The next time it happened on November 9th, another person who I've contacted and interviewed is a former NATO Spanish intelligence officer who was contacted by the Galactic Council on November 9th, 2010, and they told him on November 24th, we're going to show our ships over New York to tell you that we mean business. This is true. On November 24th, and you can go to ExopoliticsTV.com, you can see all of the YouTubes of all the ships over New York. And then Stanley Fulham says, well, I know I'm going to die, and this is my last communique. He says there'll be galactic council ships, I'm being told, are going to show themselves over Moscow and London in January of 2011. So we wait, and over January of 2011, and you can go up to exopolitics.com, you'll see all the articles and all the videos over Moscow and over London. Okay, so, and in terms of exopolitics, you can imagine in this, you know, this is debate, right? So we're in all these debates. People say, no, that isn't. And you say, yes, it is. But, you know, you can read the articles and you can look at the things, and you either grok it, you know, if you see the whole thing, you go, yeah, that's it. Or you go, no, or you see, because we're in this 15-year process. So I think that what we've done is we've been able to actually land these parameters and land the information from the other dimensions in a way that it's down now in print. We're going to have a big conference in Spain in 2012, beginning the conference of the new light, you know. So this is the work of exopolitics. In other words, it's like where the rubber meets the road. What are the scientific things? I have a tremendous debt of gratitude to Dr. Carl Johan Kalaman, because he really gave the framework for what I saw the driving force in this universe. Then I was able to extract it to the multiverse and to the afterlife to bring that larger model. Another colleague of mine who lives here in Vancouver, who's also friends with Dr. Kalaman, Barbara Hand-Clow.
Yes.
And
I've interviewed Barbara, yeah.
Oh, good.
She's a bit tired from she's been traveling a lot recently.
Yeah.
Speaking a lot about the turning point.
Yeah, what we do is we get together for lunch every often here in Vancouver, and we talk about
group of people.
Yeah, we talk about the state of of everything, just like you and I are talking now. You know, about what is the state, and so this is the work that we do, which is really to bring it down to earth, and to make practical plans. Reality. And since the publication of the book in the year 2000, there's been an acceleration of the opening of Earth and Earthlings to the universe. Now over 30 to 40 nations have opened their secret extraterrestrial UFO files in Europe, in South America, in Asia, New Zealand, Australia.
So we're talking part of the government here.
Yeah.
Military files.
Yes.
Things that were classified before have been now open and are shared on an international level.
Yeah, and that process has become tremendously accelerated since Exopolitics came out, and this meme has sort of been shared. And there are about 30 or 40 exopolitics organizations throughout the world, and it's been it was named for Wood of the Year, and people understand it. You know, it's just kind of understood. So it's like it opened up a whole part of the collective mind, I think, to be able to think about, oh, well, of course, there are other civilizations, you know, and we had been under such
Hello, my beautiful co-creators. Lilu here. Today we're in Vancouver, actually in British Columbia in Canada, with Alfred, that is actually the author of Exopolitics. So very, very exciting. And Alfred is also a futurist. So we're going to talk about ETs, ITs, what's really going on in this universe. And you're a pioneer, really. You've been researching these topics since 1973?
Yes, I'm of the class of 1973.
Uh-huh.
That's when I had my experience.
Uh-huh. And that's when you moved also to this area, because you're saying this area is really special and marked quite a pivotal point in your own research. And
yeah, I think that this area is special. I've lived all over the planet, and I was living in New York City at the time in 1973, and actually Peter Zowski, who's one of the great hosts of the Canadian Broadcasting Company, asked me to come up to Vancouver. I think it was when my first book came out. Yeah, that's Papillon.
What is exopolitics? How do you define that?
Yeah.
Let's start from there.
Yeah, sure. Exopolitics is the science of relations between or among intelligent civilizations in the multiverse. And it appears that we live in a multiverse. Our universe is composed of, billions of galaxies. I mean, we don't know what the number is. We know that in our galaxy alone, there probably, the latest number was 500 million planets like ours, and that's probably a gross conservative estimate. No. And we don't know how many universes there are in the multiverse, because they're parallel universes. And so there are many parallel universes, and then we have the dimensions of, quote, the afterlife and the spiritual dimensions. And all of those are part of the multiverse also. In fact, my next book that's coming out later on asked me to come up to Vancouver to be on his CBC national television show when my first book came out in 1974. So I flew up from New York City and spoke to all of Canada about this coming era. And it just felt like this was kind of my, charm city, and a beautiful city it was. And my wife and I were married in January 1st of 1998. So we came here on our honeymoon, and we decided to move here on permanent honeymoon. So we're here. Yeah.
And you've been really exposing a lot of information that a lot of people have not really dared to expose, haven't you?
To me, it's very natural.
Yeah.
and it's like, it's what I've lived with over the last 40 years. But I guess suddenly now's the time for it all to come out. So it's like I've been exposing it all along, but it's just people are starting to take notice of what I've been doing now.
So what
here is called dimensions, the dimensional ecology of the multiverse. So exopolitics talks about how intelligent civilizations relate to each other. And this book came out in the year 2000. And I like to think about it, that old thing about when monkeys, there was a bunch of islands with monkeys on them, and then in one of the islands, monkeys on one island started washing their potatoes, and then sweet potatoes or yams and all the other ones. The humanity was sort of lacking a meme or some systematic way that our society could interface with other intelligent civilizations. And with exopolitics, this gives a whole schematic. by which we as a civilization can interact with other civilizations, be they be on other planets or in other dimensions adjacent to ours. So with the launching of my book, it really launched a whole new field. But not only a new field, a new opening